Hello everyone, Bag here. I'm back from my mini break with the content that you've all been waiting for. Cipher and Hyacine both have many changes to talk about, so let's waste no time at all and get right into things. So you know how I just said that each of them have very large changes? Well, that was only half true, as Hyacine has had the least amount of changes that I've seen for a unit in their beta, especially when compared to Cipher, who has been changed a lot. Instead, our perception of Hyacine has shifted heavily, simply due to the community's understanding of her evolving as time has passed. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. For a brief rundown of her kit, Hyacine is a remembrance unit whose main utility is in her healing. She has a Memosprite, Little Ika, that she summons with her skill or ultimate. This Memosprite automatically heals units when they take damage from any source, while at the same time Little Ika consumes some of its own HP. When Hyacine ults, she gains a buff for 3 turns. This buff not only gives the entire team a large amount of bonus max HP, but the buff also upgrades Ika, where now its heal heals the entire team rather than just a person that got damaged, and also after Hyacine acts, Ika lets out an AoE attack that scales off of a portion of the amount of healing done by Ika and Hyacine, before then clearing half of that overall tally. Hyacine herself is pretty simple. Her basic is standard, and her skill and ultimate are just team-wide heals that also heal or summon Ika, which is very similar to how RMC works with Mem. So then, what has changed about her since her first iteration? For one, Little Ika is now immune to CC, which obviously adds a lot to how reliably it can heal the team. It's a nice change overall, especially since a lot of Hyacine's energy rotations rely in some part on Ika getting hit, so lessening the problems that brings helps smoothen out her game plan. For her next change, Hyacine's energy was decreased from 150 to 140. This is a pretty important change, as her energy requirements is one of her largest setbacks. I'll talk more about this in my analysis of her, but Hyacine has a pretty strict energy rotation that is hard to plan around with the SP generation that you would expect from a sustain, so 10 less energy is pretty big for her. And that's basically it. Seriously, they changed how Ika works so that its attacks are considered extra turns instead of individual actions, but yeah, Hyacine has like 2 important changes. So now that we've had some time to see how she works, where does Hyacine stand in the meta right now? Well, as a sustain, I think she can provide a lot of utility for an account due to her variable SP needs. Since Ika's baseline sustaining is not SP hungry, if you just want to run Hyacine as a pure SP battery with her high speed, while sacrificing the uptime of her ultimate unless if she gets hit a lot, then she will do this job better than anyone not named Gallagher. But unlike Gallagher, she has actual personal damage through Ika that gives her a strong baseline of utility that can help literally any team, not just those that scale off of HP. Is this upgrade of utility stronger than investing in premium support options that a team really needs instead? Well, no, not really. Like Tribi, the entirety of her damage is AoE, so in single target her damage is literally a fifth of what it otherwise would be, and if you don't use her skill very often, then you aren't healing as much, which then means that Ika will be doing less damage, which is its main selling point in this context. This damage is even more variable depending on if the supports on her team are single target or not, since the likes of Tribi or Cipher can really make her damage utility shine, or rather, the lack of someone like them on a team can make her feel rather flimsy. Still, outside of Linkshaw or Gallagher in Break, she really just does not have any real competition for damaging sustains, so even with these setbacks, she kind of just wins by default here. When comparing her against Linkshaw in teams that want their frequent attacks, like Fei Xiao or the Herda, it's a trade-off where Linkshaw provides more stacks, but Hyacine has much better damage. So your mileage depends on if those few extra stacks from Linkshaw actually end up leading to an impactful extra ult or not. The same thing goes for Aventurine, although his stack generation is very tied to how quickly the enemies attack, which then also goes for Linkshaw with her emergency heal from Fuyuan, and also for Hyacine, since her getting hit by enemies is very important for her energy rotation. In fact, Hyacine is doubly reliant on enemies attacking her, since AoE attacks give her double the amount of energy, as Ika getting hit also gives that energy to Hyacine. This also means for any attack that either Ika or Hyacine's taunt value will result in Hyacine getting energy. So although she does have a demanding energy rotation, her usefulness in damage and AoE hits largely depends on the fight. And in her actual niche with HP scalers, she is about what you'd expect. Here, she is able to spam her skill since these HP scalers don't use SP, leading to higher ult buff uptime and more Ika damage. Her extra HP benefits Castra's teams by a lot, from giving more HP for Castras to drain, to Ika existing, giving Castras another HP bar to drain from, to also giving Tribi more damage from the HP buff, to Ika benefiting from the dragon's 20% alt-type respen field. Hyacine actually charges Castras a bit slower than Gallagher in an AoE setting, since units like RMC and Tribi are just unbeatable in terms of generating charge. But in lower enemy settings, or in settings like Pure Fiction, where his Besotted debuff has a lot less uptime, her charging can really shine. Although if you are using her for lower enemy fights, then Hyacine's own damage will be lower. So that's kind of a trade-off, but she's still overall really strong in those fights. So yeah, she's really good for Castris, not as good as someone like Tribi or her S1 if you don't have the Battle Pass option, but if you want to vertically invest in Castris, then yeah, she's a very safe bet. For Maide or Blade, she's good on a much more surface level. She obviously provides way more than any other sustain can for them, but sustains are usually the lowest impact role for the performance on the team. So it's not like she's that revolutionary, her competition is just not on her level, if that makes sense. Specifically for Blade, her signature is the real difference maker, with its 1% HP drain, giving him a lot of extra stacks. So at E0 S0, Hyacine might not be the most important to go for their teams. Overall though, Hyacine is in a pretty good spot. Conditionally strong damage, conditionally strong SP generation, and really conditionally effective buffing with her HP buff. If you don't want to invest in sustains, I don't really think that she'll change your mind, but for an overall account upgrade with how universal she can be, then yeah, she's a pretty good pickup. A plug here to ask to subscribe. These type of vids are the norm here, so if you like this format and you want to see it for future patches, then stick around for my future content. Also, if you are a regular viewer, then you should follow my Twitch. We have a really welcoming, close-knit community, so if you want to ask any questions about the game, or if you just want to chill with some chill people, then stop on by. Alright, back to the vid. Let's next talk about Cipher, who, like I said before, got a substantially larger amount of changes compared to Hyacine since the start of the pre-release cycle. From large buffs to large nerfs, it's at least clear that she is a good bit stronger than where she was in her initial iteration. So let's get into it. To go over her kit, Cipher is a hybrid sub-DPS damage amper that has a very unique charging mechanic from her talent. Cipher always has a marked enemy on the field, and when that enemy or the other enemies on the field at a reduced rate are damaged, then that damage is stored at a portion of the total amount that was dealt. This stored damage is then dished back out by Cipher's ultimate as a blast attack true damage hit that does its full damage regardless of the amount of enemies. So for example, against 3 targets, the true damage distribution looks like this, but in single target it's more like this. Other than that really cool part of her kit, she is pretty standard. Her skill is a blast attack that debuffs the enemy's attack while buffing her own attack. She has a massive debuff that's applied to the enemy by existing, and she has a follow-up in her kit that's gotten some pretty substantial changes to go through in itself. So on that note, let's go through her changes. First, let's look at her third trace, as it's the center of a lot of changes. Her 30% defense shred has been replaced by a 40% vulnerability shred, and instead of a 10% action advance at the start of every wave, she instead gets an extra 100% crit damage on her follow-up attack. We'll get back to the follow-up attack stuff later, as it's its own can of worms. As for the vulnerability change, well, it's hard to really articulate how important this change is, other than the shred itself just being 10% stronger, but what might help is comparing it to Jiaoshu. Jiaoshu gets a 35% vulnerability shred at max Ashen Roast stacks, on top of a 15% ultimate vulnerability shred specifically. So Cipher's 40% is definitely nothing to sneeze at, especially when that's Jiaoshu's only real damage amping, and Cipher has her much higher personal damage and ultimate proportional true damage. Speaking of personal damage, this has been the most contentious factor of her kit by far. Like for example, looking at her ultimate, the non-true damage attacks started at a respectable amount of scaling, before that scaling was then doubled, and then cut back to what it was before. In the second to last iteration of her kit, she was seriously a genuine main DPS that could clear incredibly fast. And now, while her personal damage is still there for sure, and still definitely impactful compared to someone like Jiaoshu and Pela, it's no longer the exact same insane utility that it became to be in between my two videos covering this pre-release cycle. The big change that stuck for Cipher's ultimate is that its energy has been increased from 100 to 130. But wait, a higher ultimate cost? Isn't her ultimate the means by which her follow-up attack is procced? Well, not anymore, as now her follow-up attack is procced once per turn. So, assuming a 3-turn ultimate rotation, you'll now be hitting this follow-up 3 times as much as you did before, which massively helps the likes of Fei Xiao, or with debuff application for Acheron depending on the light cone. But with this increase of follow-up attack frequency comes a lowering of its damage. And yeesh, from 400% to 150%. The extra 100% crit damage doesn't make up for how harsh this number cut is. But again, compared to how she was before, it's going to be procced a lot more often. While her follow-ups will be doing more damage overall than it did before, having it be spread out like this makes it a lot less front-loaded, which is bad for fast clears that wants big numbers up front as fast as possible. So it's a trade-off that overall makes her stronger than where she started, thanks to giving her much more synergy with allies who want frequent attacks. And also her follow-up properly gives 5 energy, as it should have at the start, but it just for some reason didn't. But in a 3-turn ultimate rotation, this adds up to an extra 15 energy, which makes that increased ult cost not nearly as bad. But alright, not everything is sunshine and rainbows with Cipher's changes, as there are some debatable nerfs to her damage accumulation. Before, she would get a total of 30% scaling of of her damage soaring to the marked enemy, with every other enemy getting 10% scaling. Now, the single target scaling has been reduced to 24%, but the other enemies got buffed to 16%. So say you deal an evenly spread out 100,000 damage to a group of enemies. Against 5 enemies, it looks like this. Against 3 enemies, it looks like this. And against one enemy, it looks like this. So an overall buff to AoE, but in single target it is a good bit weaker, which is relevant for units like Fei Xiao, who otherwise work really well with her. Keep in mind that this isn't an exact science, as things like random bounce attacks or the Herd of Skill have AoE hits that aren't spread out evenly, so their rate of charge won't be consistent. And as a last minor change, her minor traces got changed to give some nice effective rate instead of HP, which makes her EHR requirements basically nothing. So from all of these ups and downs, I think Cipher has ended up as a pretty good unit in isolation, but with how team comps are right now, she just doesn't really have that much of a defined home in the meta overall. Her and Hyacine are kind of fitting this new niche alongside Chibi of providing substantial enough buffs alongside actual personal damage. While her damage isn't as high as it was during certain parts of this pre-release cycle, the amount of focus damage that she can still put out with her ultimate is very, very good, especially if you can hit her ultimate against a single target so that all of the true damage is focused onto a singular important health bar. This situation is also kind of like Hyacine and Chibi, where like her personal damage is still better than her direct competition, so even though she doesn't hit as hard as Hyacine or Chibi, she still kind of just wins by default in her own niche. As a damage amper, Cipher's buffs are vulnerability and true damage are general enough that she can work in literally any team, although she will always be second fiddle to units who are actually needed to make a carry function. She doesn't replace Chibi in Castra's teams, Robin in Fei Xiao teams, or Sunday in Aglaia teams. But as a generalist buffing option, like if you want to use her as a 4th slot in a sustainless team, then she can put in a good amount of work. I'm not really saying that this jack of all trades, master of none identity is worth pulling for on its own, but well, it never hurts to be universal in this game, so I can't really take that away from her. Her specific niches are in Fei Xiao teams, thanks to her follow-up attacks and strong buffing being outright better when compared to March, Mose, or Topaz, and with Acheron teams, where she buffs similarly to Jiaoshu, except with actual personal damage in exchange for less potential stack generation. Cipher specifically works well if you have her signature, since Pearls doesn't reapply its buffs consecutively onto the same enemy, which you might already be familiar with if you use your Pearls on Pela or something like that. With her signature, she's either a really good unit to use alongside Jiaoshu, or she can work as a genuine substitute for him. She doesn't completely make Jiaoshu irrelevant like she did before her final iteration, but she is still competitive as an alternative option. Besides her raw buffing and damage that she can provide, you can get a lot out of her by storing the built-up damage from her talent for important parts of the fight. That, in my opinion, is Cipher's most unique strength. She isn't like RMC where she just gives proportional true damage, but rather you get to choose when this true damage is being used. If you don't need the damage from her ultimate to clear a wave within a cycle, then you can just not ult, sacrificing her ult's damage in order to then transfer that stored damage onto the next wave. No other unit can really do this, and in my opinion, it's really, really cool. So, her prescribed use is in bringing some 2.x units to a higher power level, while her general account utility is being a damaging version of Jiaoshu. Her longevity as a unit really depends on the direction that Star Rail takes its future carries. If every team in the future is an Aglaia team that really needs certain units, then she'll always be a bit niche. But when general support is needed, her true damage will always be strong. What that means for right now is that there really aren't that many account scenarios where gunning for Cipher makes too much sense. She is a good unit being released around massive account upgrades as far as the eye can see. If you want her to be a fill for roles in your account, then she for sure can. But if you are anything like me in that you don't like pulling for carries if you don't have the meta team to use them with, then Cipher might not have that many uses for you outside of her few designated niches and in sustainless comps. To go over the new relics, one set has received some changes. The carry set that gives attack percent after being targeted by allies' single target skills has had its conditions changed. Now, you only need 2 stacks to receive the buff, and the attack buff has been changed to just be a flat 48% instead of 16% per stack, which doesn't actually change anything about the buff, but it prevents the buff from being lowered with the lower amount of stacks. This still doesn't really make this set all that applicable to any current carries when compared to their respective best relic sets, but I guess we'll see what the ramifications are of this change when the characters that the set was actually made for come out. As a reminder, this is probably the Finon set with what we know about him so far. And with these sus leaks for Saraydra, it sounds like she gives a single target target extra turn buff to an ally, which would obviously synergize really well with this set's low buff up time. And that's everything that I feel good about covering right now. As always, check either the pinned comment or any of my community posts for any changes that happen to these characters after this video is posted, as the last couple patches have had some last minute changes for their respective characters. Other than that, expect my coverage for Hyacine to start soon after this video, as well as the coverage for 3.4 as soon as that information is put out. Until then, I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Bye!